My name is Oneil Townsend. I'm 73 years old, and my hands don't close all the way anymore. 2 weeks ago, I stood in the lobby of my son's new headquarters and read a bronze wall about his life. The first two words on it were self-made. I read all 60 feet of that wall twice looking for my name. It wasn't there. My wife's name was there, spelled right and told wrong. In the middle of that lobby, under glass, sat the workbench I built in 1979. The little card said somebody found it at a swap meet in Tulsa. $40. I was still standing there when my son walked up behind me. Before we go any further, take a second to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read them. Now let me take you back to April 9th, 1986, the day I made the promise that took 40 years to keep. The men came for the shop in March. Trueline Systems had bought the whole block on Ferris Street. My shop sat in the middle of it, Townsend Machine and Weld. 47 years of my life behind a green steel door. A young man in a good coat introduced himself as Reese Kavanaugh. He had a clipboard and two men behind him wearing white cotton gloves. "Mr. Townsend, we want to preserve it," he said. I told him preserve was a funny word for empty. He smiled like I'd made a joke. He said the campus would honor the block's history. He said the bench belonged in the lobby under lights where people could see real work. I'd left my reading glasses in Walt's truck. The print on his form was small and gray. He turned it toward me and set a pen on top. My hands were bad that day, cold morning damp since Sunday. The pen rolled. He put 2 fingers on the barrel and steadied it while I signed. Artifact donation and display consent. I remember the title because it was the only line I could read. There was a second page. He lifted it, held it a half second and laid it back down. "Just a standard language," he said. The gloved men carried my bench out sideways through the door. It had gone in that door before the door was ever painted. I stood and watched the clean square it left on the concrete gray in the middle of 47 years of oil. Reese shook my hand at the curb. His grip was careful the way you hold something old. I didn't ask what page 2 was for. That question cost me the next 3 months of my life. Marianne was 31 that spring. The room at Cordell General had one window and a radiator that knocked. She kept a blue notebook on the tray table, the kind kids use for spelling. Her handwriting got smaller as the weeks went. Bradley was 10. He was out in the hall with a coloring book and a nurse who liked him. She asked me to sit on the bed instead of the chair. Then she said the thing she'd been building up to for a week. "Our boy will have the life we never had." I said all right. She said that wasn't a promise. She said, "Say it." I said it. She wrote it in the notebook anyway. April 9th in blue ink, like she didn't trust my memory or my nerve. Then she asked for one more thing, and that one was harder. "Don't let him carry what it cost. Just let him carry the life." I gave her that too. She died in December, 8 months later, on a Tuesday, while the plant whistle was blowing. That night I went to the shop because the house was loud with nothing in it. I got under the bench with a chisel and cut 4 marks into the underside near the left leg. MT 4986. 6 inches over was my maker's stamp. I'd punched it into every piece I built since I opened. Trueline O, T Cordell OH. Trueline is a trade word. It's the straight you set first before anything else gets measured off it. Get it wrong, and everything after is wrong, and it looks fine for a long time. 23 years later, my son named his company Trueline. I never told a reporter that. Nobody ever asked me. Here's what 40 years looked like. Night shift at the shop days at Kessler Dairy welding tanks. Bradley did homework on a milk crate under that bench while I ran bead. He learned fractions off a tape measure. I broke my left wrist in 91 and worked with it taped. I broke the right in 99 and did the same. That's where the hands come from. Not one big thing, 10,000 small ones. Purdue costs more every year. I wrote the checks by hand 1 semester at a time, and I never let that boy see a balance. Then 2003. He was 26, working for a freight broker in Columbus, and he had a thing he'd built on nights that routed trucks better than what the big outfits were running. He needed $86,000. I took a second mortgage on the house. That got me part of it. The rest came from 12 acres out past the county line. Marianne's family land. The piece her father left her. I sold her land. I want to be honest about that because it's the part that still sits in me at 2 in the morning. I handed him a brown envelope in the bank parking lot on a Thursday. He counted it once and then couldn't stop crying, which embarrassed us both. He said, "Your name goes on it, Dad. I swear." I told him what my father told me. A man doesn't ask to be paid twice. There was no note, no shares, no paper at all. On purpose. I wanted him clean. For 23 years that was fine. Then somebody wrote it down wrong in bronze 60 feet long. Sadie came home for spring break in her mother's old Subaru. My granddaughter is 19, second year at Ohio State, and she talks with her hands. She had an assignment, an oral history. One family member's 6 sessions. She picked me. I told her I'd bore her to death. She said that was the assignment. She also brought a stiff cream envelope. May 2nd, ribbon cutting, True Line Systems Campus, Cordell, Ohio. Guest. I turned it over twice looking for another word. I was making coffee when she asked it. She'd been circling it for an hour, I could tell, and she asked it into the cupboard instead of at me. "Grandpa, were you gone? When Dad was little?" "Like for a while." The percolator was going. I let it go. I asked who told her that. She got very interested in the sugar bowl. She said it was in the company history. The docent script, she said, for the lobby. I asked what it said. She said she'd only heard a piece, something about a house with one parent in it. I set the coffee down. I said, "Sweetheart, I was there every night." She nodded, fast, the way kids do when they want you to stop. I said, "Ask anybody in this town over 60. She said, "I know." But she'd asked. That's what I keep coming back to. She's mine. She's known me 19 years, and somebody had put a sentence in her head that made her ask. Somewhere out there was another version of me walking around this town. I wanted to know what he'd done. Bradley and Vanessa came out to the house on a Sunday. My son is 49 now, gray at the sides, and he still checks a room's exits when he walks in. My daughter-in-law is chief brand officer. She wrote the wall. I didn't know that yet. They brought a gray suit in a bag and a sheet of paper in a folder. Guest guidance opening day. Vanessa read it out loud, warmly, the way you'd read a menu. No press questions. Front row seat 4. Please don't reference the shop. Please don't reference funding. Please remain seated during remarks. I asked who writes guidance for a guest. She laughed. She said it was standard for family. Then she explained the stakes, and I'll give her credit, she didn't dumb it down. A funding round. 4.1 billion. A memoir with an advance, she said out loud without blinking. A $60 million state incentive package tied to building here. The narrative is an asset, Dad, she said. Assets need protecting. Bradley didn't look up from his phone the whole time. Then he did, and he was gentle about it, which was worse. You could watch the live stream, he said. It's 4 hours on your feet. I said I'd manage. Vanessa touched the soup bag on her way out. She said the tie was already knotted, so I wouldn't have to. She meant my hands. She said it kindly. After they left, I sat in the kitchen a long while. They had printed instructions for me, which meant somebody had been managing me for a good while, and I'd never once been in the room when they did it. So I decided to get out there 2 hours early. Walt dropped me at the campus at 7 in the morning, 3 weeks out from the opening. A side door was propped for the carpet crew. Nobody stops a man my age carrying nothing. The lobby ceiling is 40 feet. The floor is polished concrete, which I appreciated because concrete is honest. The wall runs 60 feet down the east side. Bronze letters hand-set, each one deeper than my thumb. The first 2 words were self-made. I've had time to think about this, and I still don't have a better way to say it. I wasn't angry. I felt like the floor had tilted about 2 degrees. Panel 1. Origin. It said the name True Line came from a professor at Purdue who told him to cut a straight line and follow it. Panel 2. Family. It said raised by a mother who worked 3 jobs alone. 3 jobs, alone. She was a school aide. She died at 31. She never worked a day past that spring, and she wasn't alone. She had me, and I was there. Then the case. Center of the floor. Glass on 4 sides. Lit from above like a museum piece. My bench. The vise I bought secondhand in 81. The burn scar by the left corner where a kid named Dale dropped a rod. The card read, "Found at a swap meet in Tulsa. $40. I walked the whole 60 feet looking for my name. Then I walked it again, slower, in case my eyes had skipped a line. It isn't there. Behind me, a voice said my name. Not Dad. My name. Oneil. He calls me that when he's about to be reasonable at me. I didn't turn right away. I said, Tulsa? Bradley came up beside me and looked at the case like he was seeing it fresh. That's brand architecture, he said. It isn't about you. I said, that bench has my stamp on it. Nobody's gonna lift a 200-pound bench, Dad. He said it lightly. It was the truest thing anybody said to me for a month. I pointed at panel 2. I said her name should be right. He said the copy was approved by 3 departments. He said audiences can't hold 2 heroes. He said it the way you'd explain a tax form to somebody. Then he did the thing. He put his hand on my shoulder, and his voice went soft, and he found the one line that shuts me up. You never did it for credit, Dad. That's the whole reason I respect you. 40 years of a rule I live by handed back to me as a muzzle. My father gave me that rule. A man doesn't ask to be paid twice. I'd said it to Bradley in a bank parking lot in 2003, and he'd remembered it, and now he was using it to keep me quiet in a lobby I helped pay for. I didn't argue. That part is on me. I said, all right, son. Out front, 2 men on a scissor lift were hanging a banner over the entrance. Black background, white type, a boy's silhouette on a step. True Line, a story of one. A documentary, Vanessa had said. Premiering opening day. A story of one. I asked Walt to drive home slow. I wanted to think about who the one was and who wasn't in it. Dot's Diner opens at 5:30. Walt Pruitt has sat in the 3rd booth since Carter was president. He slid the Cordell register across the table before I got my coat off. Front page above the fold. Local boys' $1 billion homecoming. Half of it was the press release word for word. I know because I'd heard Vanessa say those same sentences in my kitchen. Self-made appeared twice. Walt is 76 and has no volume control. He kept his voice down anyway, which told me plenty. Neil, he said. Somebody asked me something Tuesday. I waited. Asked me where you went, back when Brad was small. I set the paper down. There were 3 men at the counter. All 3 of them I've known since the Ford dealership still had a lot. 2 were looking at me. The 3rd was working very hard at his eggs. That's the part I wasn't ready for, not the wall, the eggs. Walt said, I told him you never went anywhere. I asked what the man said back. Walt turned his cup around on the saucer twice. He said that's what they always say. I've lived in Cordell my whole life. I buried both my parents here. I welded the handrail on the church steps in '94 and never sent a bill. A press release ran on a Thursday, and by Tuesday I was something people say that about. Walt walked me out to the truck. He stopped with his hand on the door. That bench, he said. You still punch your stamp underneath, or did you quit? I told him I never quit. He nodded slow and didn't say another word about it. But he'd put a thought in my head, and it stayed. I drove up to see my son at the office in Columbus. I waited 20 minutes in a lobby with a water feature. His assistant brought me a cortado, which turned out to be coffee. I'd rehearsed in the truck. I kept it short. I told him I wasn't asking for my name. I said, take mine off, put hers back on. That's the whole ask. He looked genuinely relieved. That's what got me. He'd braced for a bill and got a request about his mother. He said, we'll look into it. He wrote something on a legal pad. He walked me to the elevator with his hand between my shoulder blades, and he asked about my hands, and he actually listened to the answer. I drove home feeling like a man who'd handled something. 3 days later, Sadie sent me a photo from the lobby. They'd changed it. Panel 2 still said a mother who worked 3 jobs alone. Not one word touched. But down in the corner of the acknowledgments in smaller letters, they'd added a new line. An early supporter, a family friend from the neighborhood. No name. Not one letter of a name. They'd given me something I never asked for, in a size that meant nothing, and left the only thing I did ask for sitting exactly where it was. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone at arm's length, because that's the only distance I can read at now. A family friend. I called Bradley twice. It went to voicemail twice. Then a man I'd met exactly once called me instead. He wanted to come out to the house. He said he had good news. Reese Kavanaugh came on a Tuesday with a leather folder and a bottle of wine I put in the cabinet. He sat at my kitchen table where Marianne used to pay the bills. He said Trueline wanted to formalize my role. Founder, heritage consultant. 3 years, $250,000. He slid it across and talked me through it the way a man walks you along a fence line he already owns. Consulting on archival materials, quarterly if I felt up to it. Then the other paragraphs. Confidentiality. No interviews, statements, or public remarks regarding the founding of the company. And on the last page, a medical rider. Coverage for degenerative joint treatment up to a stated annual amount at a hand clinic in Cleveland. He'd named the clinic. He'd named my condition. I never told one person at that company about my hands, which meant somebody had gone and found out. He set a pen on the table uncapped, facing me. It was a bad day. Cold rain since Sunday. My fingers were a set of hooks. I looked at that pen and I could not have picked it up if the house was burning. He saw me look. He watched me fail to do it, and he kept his face perfectly kind the whole time. I asked him what he'd call this. He said, "This isn't hush money, sir. It's a thank you with a schedule attached." I said I'd think it over. He left the folder. They always leave the folder. After his car turned onto the highway, I sat there with a question I couldn't get around. Why would a company pay $250,000 to a man who had never once asked them for anything? Let me step out of the story for a second. A man had just put $250,000 on the table where my wife used to pay the bills. And what he was really buying was my silence about her name. If you've ever been handed something generous and felt smaller afterward, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this reach the people who need it. And tell me down in the comments, what would you have done with that pen? All right, back to it. Because 11 days later, they filled a high school gym. The community preview ran in the Cordell High Gymnasium on April 18th. Free admission, part of the incentive agreement. 700 people, which is about everybody. They'd hung black drape over the bleachers. The band boosters sold popcorn at a card table. I sat in row 4 with Walt. Sadie sat with her mother 3 rows up. The trailer ran 6 minutes. It opened on a house that looked a lot like mine, same kind of porch light. Then a hallway, a door, a man's back going out of it. You never see his face. You hear a screen door and a truck starting. Then a boy on a step waiting while the light goes blue. Then my son's voice recorded in a room with good acoustics. There wasn't a hand on my shoulder, so I built one. They never said my name. They didn't have to. Bradley Townsend has exactly one father. That father was in row 4, and every soul in that gym knew it. I didn't stand up. I'm not proud of it or ashamed of it. I counted floor tiles between my shoes and the seat in front of me. 9. Walt's hand closed on my forearm and stayed there. Behind me, a woman was crying quietly. I know her. She taught Bradley 4th grade. The lights came up. Applause. The long kind. The kind that keeps going while people look around at each other. The woman next to me leaned over and patted my knee the way a church woman does. "Poor kid," she said. "Can you imagine?" She wasn't being cruel. She thought she was consoling a man about a boy she felt sorry for. I said yes, I could imagine. Then I walked out through 700 of my neighbors, and not one of them was wrong to think what they were thinking. Here's what it costs to lose a reputation in a town of 6,000. Sunday First Methodist. I've sat in the 4th pew since 1972. That morning there was room on both sides of me, and there is never room. Nobody was mean. That isn't how it works here. People just got busy with their bulletins. Monday, the hardware store. Gil Marsh has sold me stock steel for 30 years. He rang me up, then leaned in and dropped his voice. "Neil," he said, "you need anything? Anything at all?" He used a voice I've only ever heard used on drunks. Tuesday, Dale Farrader crossed Ferris Street to the sunny side so he wouldn't have to pass me. I taught that boy to strike an arc when he was 15. He's 51 now and he crossed the street. Wednesday night, Sadie called from her dorm and her voice came apart in the first sentence. Her roommate had watched the trailer on her phone. Her roommate had asked her carefully whether her grandfather was around now or still gone. Still gone. I told her I'd fix it. I didn't know how. I said it anyway because she's 19 and somebody has to say it. After I hung up, I stood in the dark kitchen a while. I can live without a plaque. I've lived without plenty. But this is where I've been my whole life. This is where Marianne is buried out on the ridge, and I go up twice a month with the little clippers. I could live in a town that never noticed me. I can't live in a town that thinks I left. Thursday morning, I got in Walt's truck and told him to take me to see a lawyer. Harriet Boland practices above the bakery on Main. The whole office smells like cinnamon, which makes bad news land a little softer. She's 61 and she reads slow on purpose. It took her 4 days to get a copy of what I'd signed in March. It came from a records clerk at Trueline who mailed it because I had signed it and it was mine. Page 1 was the donation. The bench given free and clear, that one is on me, I knew what I did. Page 2 was a limited likeness consent. Use of my name and image in connection with the display of the donated artifact. I sat back. I figured that was that. I'd signed the whole thing away standing in my own doorway without my glasses. Harriet took her reading glasses off, which is how she tells you to pay attention. "Neil," she said, "a display isn't a film." She explained it twice because I made her. A documentary that shows a living, identifiable man in a false light is a real exposure. Defamation. False light. That's what a depiction release is for. It's the paper that lets a production put words and actions on a real person. And no distributor takes delivery without a clearance file. No clearance file, no errors and omissions insurance. No insurance, no platform. I asked if that meant I could sue somebody. She said I could. She said that wasn't the point. You don't need to sue anybody, she said. You just need to not sign something. I asked whether they had ever asked me to sign anything. She said that was the question, wasn't it? 2 days later, a woman I'd never met knocked on my door and said she was the director. Mona Ferris is 41, and she'd come to Cordell to shoot what they call B-roll. Grain elevator, water tower, my empty shop. She stopped at Dots for lunch. That's how she heard the town's version of the story, and the town's version did not match the film she was cutting. She sat in my front room with her boots on and her hands between her knees. I showed her my hands. I showed her 30 years of pay stubs in a shoebox because Marianne kept everything. I took her out to the garage and showed her the shop sign, Townsending Machine and Weld, that I couldn't make myself throw out. She didn't say much. She wrote down 2 dates. Then she told me the things she'd come to tell me. The final cut names me, not in the trailer, in the film. A card on screen, 1 line about the father, legal flagged it 3 weeks back. They sent up a request for a depiction release signed by Oneil Townsend. I asked her who was handling it. She said Reese had told her twice that the family was handling it. That's when the folder on my kitchen table stopped being a thank you. They weren't buying my gratitude. They were buying a signature they legally needed and couldn't get any other way. $250,000 a hand clinic in Cleveland, and 1 paragraph that said I would never speak about the founding. Mona stood at the door a long moment. "Mr. Townsend," she said, "if you don't sign, I don't have a film." I said I understood that. She said, "If you don't sign, they don't have a round." Then she left, and I sat down because my legs had gotten unreliable. Sadie came home that weekend and went through the barn without asking. She came in with dust on her sleeves and a blue notebook in both hands. Spelling book blue, bent cover, her grandmother's handwriting getting smaller as it goes. She found the page herself. April 9th, 1986. Our boy will have the life we never had. She sat down on the floor by the wood stove, which she's done since she was 4. I told her about the stamp. I've never told anybody about the stamp. Not because it's a secret, but because a man doesn't stand around explaining his own tools. Trueline, O.T. Cordell, Ohio. Punched into every piece I ever built. And underneath the bench by the left leg cut with a chisel the night after we buried her. MT 4986. Sadie went very still. "Grandpa," she said, "that bench is in a glass case." I said, "I know." "With a card that says Tulsa." I said, "I know that too." She looked up at me and I watched a 19-year-old do arithmetic that 3 departments at a billion-dollar company never bothered to do. "Has anybody ever turned it over?" "Nobody has. Nobody would. It weighs 200 pounds, it's behind glass, and there's no reason on this earth to lift it. Unless a man asks them to. In front of everybody, on the day they open the building." I called Mona Ferris that night. Sadie held the phone up because I can't work the buttons fast enough. I said, "Get me my seat." Front row, Mona said. And the release, I said. I'm not signing anything. Vanessa came alone on a Thursday with her hair down, which I'd never seen. She cried in the first 2 minutes. I don't think it was fake. I think she can do both things at once. She said she'd been protecting me. She said the film people were animals. She said Reese had gone too far, and she'd only just learned about the folder. Then she stopped crying and got to it. If the round repriced the Cordell campus paused, Phase 2 goes to Indiana, 1,400 jobs. I know what 1,400 jobs means here. The paper mill went in 2019. There are streets on the north side with 3 empty houses in a row. She let that sit. Then she picked up Sadie. She has finals, Vanessa said. Don't make her choose between you. I got up and poured her a coffee, because she was in my kitchen, and that's how I was raised. Then I asked her the only question I had left. I said, why did you have to get her name wrong? She didn't follow at first. I said, Marianne, why write her as a single mother? And she answered me honestly, which I will give her credit for as long as I live. Grief doesn't test well, Neil, she said. A single mother does. She said audiences track a widow's husband as a loose thread. She said a woman alone is a clean line. I looked at her a long time. She had taken my wife's death and my 40 years run them through something, and they came back out as a loose thread. She left the coffee sitting there. I stood at the window and watched her car go. Then I went and found a stamp for an envelope. Let me stop again just for a minute, while I'm still standing at that window. A woman sat in my kitchen and told me my wife's name didn't test well. So let me ask you something real. Is there a name in your family that got written out of the story? Put it in the comments. Just the name. Let's put him back somewhere. And subscribe, because what happened on May 2nd, I still have trouble explaining. Alright, back to that envelope and the letter I spent 2 nights writing by hand. I wrote it by hand. 2 nights and 4 drafts because my hands quit after about 10 minutes, and because I kept putting in things that were true but mean. The version I mailed was 300 words and had almost no adjectives in it. I did not say my son lied. I said 3 facts. I built the bench in 1979. I lived at 4114 Quarry Road, Cordell from 1975 until now, and my son lived there with me until he left for college. In 2003, I mortgaged that house and sold 12 acres of my late wife's family land and gave him the proceeds. I signed it and put my phone number under my name. Ross Deemer called me Friday afternoon. He's edited the Register for 19 years, and he coached Bradley's Little League team. He talked a long time before he said anything. Trueline is the paper's largest advertiser. That's 40% of print revenue, and the publisher Ellis Frames sits on the County Economic Development Board, the board that voted out the incentive package on the strength of a certain application. Ross said he was sorry. He meant it. He said he'd been sick over it since Tuesday. He didn't run the letter. I drove out to the shop that evening. Somebody had already pulled the green door off its hinges for the demo crew. It was leaning against the wall in the weeds. I stood inside and looked at the clean gray square on the concrete where the bench had been. Every door I knew how to knock on was shut, except one. They had already printed my name on a card. Front row seat 4. No morning I walked into the Cordell post office and mailed the folder back to Reese Kavanaugh. Certified. Return receipt, $4.80. The contract went back unsigned. The check went back unendorsed. I didn't put in a note because anything I wrote would have turned into a speech. Then Sadie sat at my kitchen table and typed 1 line into an email for me because I don't do email and I'm too old to start. I declined the depiction release. In writing as requested. Oneil Townsend. She read it back to me twice. She asked if I was sure. I said no. She sent it anyway, which is why she's mine. Tuesday I took the gray suit out of the bag. It fit, which annoyed me. Vanessa had knotted the tie already so I wouldn't have to. I untied it. It took me 11 minutes and I got it crooked. Then I found my union pin in the dish on the dresser, the 25-year one, local 468. I put it on the lapel. That pin was the only thing I wore that day that they didn't buy. May 2nd, 7 in the morning, Walt pulled up in the F-150 with a passenger door that sticks. He had a tie on. I've seen Walt in a tie 3 times, twice at funerals. He didn't ask what I was going to do out there. He said, "You eat?" I said no. We stopped at Dots and he made me eat. I wasn't going out there to ruin my son. I was going out there to stop being a rumor. Ceiling 40 feet, 400 employees in folding chairs, 9 reporters behind a rope line, a woman from the governor's office, the mayor, 2 men in quarter zips who turned out to be the lead investors. The Cordell High Band was set up outside the glass doors with their instruments on their knees, a camera on a boom for the live stream. The wall was under blue drape, all 60 feet of it. The case sat in the center of the floor under its own light, and the light hums if you stand close. They put me in the front row, seat 4, aisle. Sadie was 3 rows back with her mother. Walt stood along the wall because he doesn't sit in chairs he doesn't own. Vanessa came down the row before it started. She put her hand on my shoulder and bent down. "Thank you for understanding," she said. I said, Bradley spoke for 6 minutes. He was good. He's always been good. He talked about a town that builds things and a kid who wanted to build something bigger. He said self-made 4 times. I counted the way I counted tiles in that gym. Then 2 men pulled a cord and 60 feet of blue drape came off the bronze with a sound like a wave going out. 400 people applauded. A reporter at the rope line raised her hand and got a nod. She asked a housekeeping question first. Then she looked down the front row. "Sorry," she said. "Who's the gentleman in the front row?" The lobby got quiet in a way it hadn't been all morning. My son looked at me. I want to be fair to him. He didn't do it fast. There was a full beat where he stood with the microphone down at his chest, and he looked at me, and I looked back, and for about a second and a half I believed it was going to go the other way. Then he lifted the mic. "That's a family friend from the old neighborhood," he said. "He knew my mother." He knew my mother. I have been married to that woman since I was 23. Her name is on a stone up on the ridge with my name cut beside it and a blank where my date goes. Somebody laughed gently, the way people do at a warm line about a man's mom. Sadie stood up in row 3. Her mother caught her wrist. She pulled it free, but she didn't say anything yet. She just stayed on her feet. Walt said one word over by the wall. 2 women near him pretended not to hear it. The reporter wrote something down and underlined it. I stood up. 400 people watched a 73-year-old man get out of a folding chair, which takes me a second these days. Bradley said, "Dad." He said it off mic. Only the front 2 rows heard it, but the front 2 rows heard it, and one of those rows was the investors. I watched the man in the gray quarter zip turn his head an inch and hold it there. I didn't go toward the stage. I went to the case. The docent was a young woman with a lanyard and a script. Her name tag said Priya. I asked her if the case opened. She looked past me at Reese Kavanaugh standing at the end of the front row with his arms crossed. Reese moved his head about an inch. No. Mona Ferris came up out of the camera pit. "Open it," she said. Priya said she wasn't authorized. Mona said, "I'm the director. Open it." Priya lifted the lid. It runs on gas struts. It went up easy and stopped. I put both hands on the bench top and I could not lift it. That's just true. I built it and I couldn't move it. Walt came up on the left. 2 kids in Trueline polos came up on the right without being asked, because they were 24 and somebody's grandfather was struggling. The 4 of them walked it up onto its side. 47 years of oil came off the underside onto the carpet runner, and nobody cared. By the left leg under the grime, cut with a chisel MT4986. And 6 inches over, punched into the steel apron, still sharp because steel keeps things true lino, T. Cordell OH. The nearest reporter had her phone up and her arm out. I turned toward it because I couldn't reach the stage mic and I wasn't going to shout. "My name is Oneil Townsend," I said. "I built this bench in 1979. Behind me, 400 people made one sound. The company is named after a line I taught him to cut. Then every head in that lobby turned to the card that said Tulsa, $40. I only had 3 things to say, and I had said them to myself in the truck. April 9th, 1986. I promised my wife our boy would have the life we never had. In 2003, I mortgaged my house and sold her family's 12 acres, $86,000, in a brown envelope. I never spent one night away from that boy. Not one. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of room anymore. Then I said the part I had come there to say. There's a film. It shows a man leaving. That man is supposed to be me. I said, 3 weeks ago their lawyers asked me to sign a depiction release. I said, I decline. In writing. I already sent it. Reese Kavanaugh started up the aisle and stopped because 11 cameras were up. Mona Ferris said it plainly from the floor in front of the investors. Without his release, there's no clearance, she said. Without clearance, there's no insurance. Without insurance, no platform takes delivery. She said, the film is finished. It doesn't ship. Vanessa got to the stage mic. She was already crying, and she found the word she wanted. This is a bitter old man, she said, hijacking his own son's. Sadie was still standing in row 3. He drove me to every practice you two missed, she said. She's 19. She wasn't loud. The boom mic got it anyway, and the live stream got it, and that is the sentence that was on every phone in this county by supper time. Vanessa stopped talking, and my son set the microphone down on the podium and stood there with nothing in his hands. He came down off the stage. He didn't come all the way to me. He stopped about 6 feet short, which is where you stop when you aren't sure you're allowed closer. He talked to the room. I don't believe he decided to. I think it just came out of him. He said, in 2004 he sat across from a man at a fund in Columbus, and the man asked who was backing him. He said, I told him nobody. He said it sounded better. He said he was 27, and it made him sound like a bet instead of a favor. He said the next year an article ran, and the article used the word self-made, and he never called to correct it. He said after that there was always a round closing or a hire starting or a piece running. There was never a good week to say it, he said, so it just got older. 400 people listened to that in complete silence. A woman 2 seats down from me had her hand over her mouth. Then he turned and asked me out loud on a live feed what I wanted. I heard the room lean in. They expected a number. There's always a number. I walked over to panel 2 where the letters are deeper than my thumb, and I laid my hand flat under the line about a mother who worked 3 jobs alone. I said, take my name off. I never asked for it. I said, put hers on. I said, Oneil Townsend, 12 acres of her family's land bought your first server. Outside the glass doors, the high school band waited with their horns up. Nobody ever gave them the signal. Here's what happened in 11 days because I know how people are, and I'm the same way. Thursday, the trailer came down off every platform it was on. Friday, the film went on indefinite hold. Mona Ferris put out 1 sentence and gave no interviews. Monday, the publisher paused the memoir and asked for independent fact-checking on the first 4 chapters. The advance went into escrow. Sadie says that means nobody gets to spend it. Wednesday, the round closed at $3.2 billion instead of $4.1. 2 funds walked, $900 million, which I only understand as a number in a newspaper. The Monday after 2 board members asked for a review of biographical claims in investor materials. They added an independent seat. 2 weeks after that, the State Economic Development Committee scheduled a hearing on the $60 million incentive application. The package survived. They tied it to verified jobs reported quarterly, which Harriet says is what should have been done in the first place. Reese Kavanaugh was gone in 48 hours. They put a white tarp over the wall, 60 feet of it up for 4 months. Kids in town called it the sheet. And that thing Vanessa told me in my kitchen about Phase 2 in Indiana and 1,400 jobs, they broke ground on Phase 2 on June 9th. Nobody lost a job. Not one. I think about that more than I think about the 900 million. She sat at my table and put this whole town on my shoulders to keep me quiet, and it wasn't even true. She showed up at my door 2 weeks later, 9 at night. Porch light on. She had a folder because these people always have a folder. She'd resigned that morning to focus on family, the release said. I let her in. I put the kettle on because she'd driven 2 hours and it was raining and my mother would come up out of the ground if I hadn't. She'd brought a joint statement, 2 paragraphs. Regrettable communication failures on both sides. A family that loves each other navigating an emotional milestone. Mutual apologies, both parties agreed to no further public comment. She talked while I poured. She said it protects Sadie. She said it lets everyone move on. She said the board would be relieved. She said, "Neil, you won. Let it be over." I sat down across from her. I said I'd sign a paper that was true. She said this was true. I said, "Read me the line where I did something wrong." She looked for it. She's a smart woman. She looked at that page for maybe 15 seconds. I said, "I'm not signing that we both got it half wrong." I said, "Only one of us wrote on a wall." She started to cry again, and then stopped herself, which was more honest than the crying was. She said, "You know I built that company's whole story." I said I did know. I said she was very good at it. I said, "You just built it out of my wife." She left the folder on the table. I put it in the wood stove Sunday. The next Saturday, my son came out to the house and sat down on my back step. He didn't knock. He sat on the second step with his coat on and waited for me to come out the way he did when he was 12 and had broken something. I sat down beside him. It took me a minute. He didn't help, which was right. We looked at the yard. He said, "I've written you an apology 40 times. I said, "I don't want it written." So he talked instead, badly, in pieces. He said the first lie was one sentence to one man in a conference room. He said that by 2010 there were 800 employees who had taken pay cuts to come work for a story. He said every year the correction got more expensive. He said he'd convinced himself I didn't want the credit and that leaving me out was a kind of respect. He said he heard how that sounded now. Then he said something I wasn't ready for. He said, "I paid for the Cleveland Clinic in 2018. I remember that. A letter came saying my consult was covered. I called to tell them to bill me and they said it was already handled and I let it drop. He said, I couldn't put your name on a wall, but I could pay for your hands. That's my son. Both of those things are my son." He asked if he could come back. I didn't hug him. I've thought about it plenty since. I still don't know if I was right. I got up, took a rag out of the bucket by the door, put it in his hand and pointed at the garage where a 200-pound bench was sitting under a tarp with lobby carpet fuzz still stuck in the oil. I said, "You can come to dinner." I said, "You can't come to rewrite." 3 networks called in 6 days. A morning show offered to fly me to New York and put me in a chair across from a woman I've watched since Marianne was alive. A producer told me my story would help millions of people. I said I appreciated it and that I don't do that. Then True Line's outside counsel called Harriet. $1 million, full acknowledgement of my contribution, a permanent installation, my name anywhere I wanted it, and a mutual non-disparagement clause with a 20-year term. Harriet read me that clause twice and then said nothing, which is her way of letting a man hear himself think. I said no. She asked why, and she wasn't arguing. She wanted it for the file. I said if I take $1 million, then for the rest of my life every person in this town gets to decide that's what it was about. It was never about that. It was about a woman named Marianne, who worked at an elementary school and died at 31. What I did do was sit 40 minutes with Ross Deemer at the register, the same man who wouldn't run my letter. He came out to the house with a notebook and couldn't look at me for the first 10 minutes. I gave him the 3 facts. I told him my son said it himself out loud in front of his own people. Nobody caught him. He said it. And I asked for one thing in print. I said, "Stop crossing the street when you see him." I said, "He's still from here. So am I." Gil Marsh cut that paragraph out and taped it in the hardware store window. It's still up. They took the tarp down in September. The first words on that wall aren't self-made anymore. Bradley wrote the new line himself in longhand and made them set it exactly the way he wrote it. It says, "Nothing here started with me. Panel 2 is gone." In its place in the middle of the lobby floor, where the glass case used to sit, there's a bronze plate on a low stand. 7 lines. It starts, Oneil Townsend, 1955 to 1986. It says what she did for work. It says she died in December. It says 12 acres of her family's land in Cordell, Ohio, bought the first equipment this company ever owned. The last line is hers, off a page in a blue spelling notebook. Our boy will have the life we never had. The bench isn't in a case. The bench is in my garage, on the same 4 legs it's had since Carter was president, and I use it, and there's fresh oil on it. Saturday mornings, there are 9 kids in the old shop on Ferris Street. Trueline offered to fund it. I said no politely twice. Local 468 covers consumables. Walt sold the F-150 with the sticky door and covered the rest, then complained about it for a solid month, then went and bought a worse truck. I can't hold a Stinger more than about 4 minutes now. So I stand behind them and talk, and Walt fixes their grip, and the ones who listen get good by August. Sadie turned in her oral history in April, 6 sessions, 41 pages plus a recording of an old man clearing his throat. Her professor asked to read part of it out loud to the class. She called me from a stairwell afterward and couldn't get through telling me about it. She titled it True Line. She put a definition at the top in her own words and got it right, which surprised me because she's never held a torch. The straight you set first. Everything after gets measured off it. Get it wrong and it looks fine for a long time. She's changing her major. Her mother is unhappy about it. I'm staying out of that one. The other thing happened on a Saturday in October. I was showing a kid named Marcus how to keep his hand steady when his arm gets tired, which is a thing you can actually teach. The door opened and my son came in wearing an apron. No car service, no assistant, no phone in his hand, which I hadn't seen since flip phones. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. 9 kids kept working because to them, he was just a guy in an apron. He picked up the push broom by the door and started at the back wall, which is where you start. I watched him a while. Then I hooked the second stool with my boot and pushed it out from under the bench about a foot in his direction. He didn't sit down. Not that day. But he saw me do it. There's a spot under my bench by the left leg where the wood went smooth from 47 years of my knee. I get down there about once a month. Getting down is fine. Getting up takes planning. I put my finger in the chisel cut and follow it. M period, T period, 4986. My finger doesn't straighten anymore, so I go by feel. Feel is enough. People have told me I won something. I don't think that's the word. Here's what I know. The promise I made that woman wasn't that our boy would be a billionaire. She'd have laughed at that. She'd have found the word ridiculous. The promise was that he'd have the life we never had. A house nobody could take, school paid, choices. He got every bit of it. I kept it. Nobody can unkeep it. Not with 60 feet of bronze. Not with a movie. What I nearly lost wasn't credit. It was the right to be who I actually was in the story of my own life in the town where I've spent every day of it. A man doesn't have to ask to be paid twice. But he does have to answer when somebody stands up in front of 400 people and says he wasn't there. Last Saturday, a 12-year-old girl named Ruthie looked at the stamp on the bench apron and asked me what a true line is. I told her to go grab a straight edge. We had all morning. So that's the whole of it. Before I let you go, I want to ask you the thing that kept me up for 3 months. If you'd been standing in front of that wall, would you have kept the peace, or would you have asked them to turn the bench over? Type 1 or 2 in the comments. I'll be down there reading. If this meant something to you, subscribe. And there's another story waiting in the description about the day I found out what else Marianne wrote in the back of that blue notebook. Thank you for sitting with me.